Welcome to this IDB Espresso Chat, where we will take on today a topic that sits at the heart of the growth and competitiveness agenda of Latin America and the Caribbean: regional integration. But not only in the sense of physical infrastructure, because building a road, a transmission line, or a port is important, but it's not enough. For integration to truly deliver, it also requires compatible rules, efficient processes, digital infrastructure, and an enabling environment for private investment and scale. To help us unpack this broader vision of integration, I'm pleased to be joined by Frannie Léautier, CEO of SouthBridge Investments. Frannie, thank you very much for being here with us at IDB Espresso Chat. So let me start with the basics. For a long time, when we talked about integration, the conversation focused mostly on infrastructure, on physical infrastructure. Why is it that it's no longer enough today to think about integration only in terms of infrastructure? And what does it mean in practice to move from infrastructure to integration?
Well, thank you very much, Anabel. It's a pleasure to be here. And as infrastructure is important because it's the foundation over which everything takes place. It's the neighbor to people, to the planet, and it really shapes the future of how things happen. However, for the results that we are looking for, whether it's development impact, productivity increases, competitiveness, ability even to deal with shocks that come from climate and so on, it has to change, and infrastructure has to serve a larger purpose. And for it to do so, it has to be first designed with intent, and the intent in this case is regional integration. But beyond that, it has to also be aligned with other systems. First with market systems, because firms are the ones that actually drive integration. They're the ones who choose where to produce, where to sell, whom to engage, and how to work and transport and move things around or move services around. Secondly, it has to also integrate with the regulatory systems, because that governs how things happen, whether it's market regulation, whether it's regulation around border issues, taxes, around procedures and processes, standards. All of those are critically important. So if infrastructure is in harmony with these two other systems, the market ecosystem and the regulatory system, then you get the results that infrastructure can deliver, but not just by itself.
I think this is a very interesting concept that integration is not really about a sector, but it's about a system. So when we say that systems need to work together, what do we mean? What elements need to be aligned for connectivity to translate really into competitiveness in the real world?
Indeed, I mean, that's a great question. If you look at infrastructure, we traditionally would build roads, ports, airports, and we make sure that the most efficient road that they can be, high quality standards, and so on. But normally we would not look at what rides on top of those systems. So if you take the example of a road, then there's the truck that's riding on that system. That truck is delivering goods or services. Those need to flow smoothly, and usually the friction that comes is not of the tires on the road, but the friction of exchanges at a border post, of delivery at a warehouse, of execution around timing of when things will be met, the logistic schedules. So all of those systems have to interact. And if you layer on top of that where we are today, where people are ordering things using e-commerce platforms, they're expecting things to be delivered in a smooth way, that puts even more pressure on the infrastructure systems then to coordinate and work smoothly with the digital backbone, with the regulatory processes that govern how a product leaves one country to another, with the service standards that are required globally to make sure that the quality of what you send is the same, whether it's going from Paraguay to Brazil or from Paraguay to Costa Rica or to the United States or to Europe. And I think those requirements of knowing what something means, whether it's in one country or another, puts additional requirement for the systems to be functioning. If a road is not smooth and you are carrying very fragile products, they get spoiled or ruined. Tomatoes or avocado and therefore they don't meet the quality standards. If what you're doing gets delayed at one border post and you didn't send a signal to the buyer on the other end, they have to get a delayed sale or a delayed use. So all those systems are integrated in this way. So when we talk about aligning and coordinating an integration of systems, it means every touch point through the entire value chain, where infrastructure is the backbone that's serving these systems, but it also has to work well on the handover points to systems that are regulated by policy, that are regulated by humans in their decision points, but that also interact with the environment in which those products are being delivered. So safety standards around perishable products, around medical equipment and medicines, around things that are hazardous like chemicals and other products. The infrastructure gets the brunt of all of that if it doesn't work well, but it also has to service it in a way that it works well. So these are the elements of integration that are critical.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, and you're touching upon many different important elements here. And I'd like to draw on your experience because we know that regional integration has, works in different ways from Europe to Asia to Africa. So what in your view are some of the most useful lessons that Latin American and the Caribbean can draw from these experiences to design more effective integration agendas?
Yeah, I think first of all, looking at Asia, there are three things that the Latin American Caribbean region can learn from Asia. One is to be consistent over multiple years in investing in the backbone infrastructure to create the asset base to start with. But secondly, to look at how you get to scale in integration and also how you sequence. Because budgets are under pressure, so sequencing becomes very critical. But then if you do something at a lower level, but you don't take it to scale, you don't see the full benefit. So I think Asia offers those lessons: consistency after multiple years, scale, and sequencing. From Europe, I think what was really successful in Europe is the regulatory integration and the commonality of standards, and really helping countries through capacity building, advisory services to get there, to meet those standards. And that became even a condition for integration. So I think Latin America and Caribbean region can learn from that. From Africa, I think there's some very interesting experiments going on now on corridor level development, like the Lobito corridor and others, which gives an example, I think, for other regions to learn from. And Latin America has amazing corridors with critical minerals, natural resources, and huge human-centered production zones that could really benefit from a corridor approach. And the second example from Africa is the experiment with trade agreements.
Yeah.
You have them across sub-regions, but then now the full African continental free trade area.
Yeah.
And that now has been endorsed and ratified by a large number of countries. I think it's the fastest ratification in the history of these types of deals. And it shows that when countries really agree to do things together, they can go very fast. And that then unlocks the value of regional integration.
Absolutely, and that's very impressive because we are talking about 54 countries that are members of the Continental Free Trade Agreement. And I think you see a very clear focus on wanting to use regional integration to drive growth across the region.
Absolutely. And Mercosur, which I think predated the African Free Trade Area, could really speed up now and take lessons from other regions. And I think maybe there are also lessons Mercosur can bring to others, because it's the oldest of the agreements so far in the developing world. And therefore, there are lots of things that have been tried. The ones that have worked very well are the infrastructure side.
Yes.
And I think that gives a huge opportunity, because if you look at Africa, for example, there's still a huge backlog of infrastructure investment. So Latin America and the Caribbean have that advantage over other regions.
Well, this is interesting, and it brings me to an important point with it, which is the role of multilateral development institutions or regional banks like the IDB. At the IDB, we are taking a renewed look at regional integration, trying to bring together all these elements that you were talking about, the infrastructure, the processes, the regulatory convergence. And we have programs in different regions, American and Central, One Caribbean, South Connection, Amazonia Forever. So what would you say is the role of multilateral development banks in moving from isolated projects to regional programs?
I think there's an absolutely critical role for the MDBs now to actually align to what is changing globally in the world and use the role that they have uniquely compared to any other institution. First, of convening, because that means bringing different voices and different perspectives to the table to solve these large problems. I think that's a unique capability of the LDBs. The second one is sharing knowledge and ideas, taking what has worked in one place, sharing it with another to speed up the learning curve. I think that's also quite unique to MDBs. But then third is to move from the role of just financier of projects to platforms, as you have said, where multiple things can happen in that platform. You can have a platform that has advisory services for regulatory change, that funds the private sector to innovate in a few areas, that supports fast tracking of critical products in the same corridor, but at the same time does the long-term heavy lifting of large-scale infrastructure investments. And that approach gives the flexibility to do things at a regional scale, even though MDBs are limited to engage country by country because the member countries are the ones that can borrow. But if you have a platform, you can do a product in one country, infrastructure in another, advisory in a third, and maybe this more convening for all of them together to make sure these investments are aligned. And then lastly, and here I'm very impressed by what you've done with IDB Invest, is really to take this approach to support the private sector and meet it where it is, whether it's small and medium enterprises needing working capital solutions, or venture capital, or large-scale multi-year investments, or public-private partnerships. I think MDBs can do it all. I think it's a very unique set of institutions. So yeah, I think the world, if we didn't have them, we'd have to have created them.
Well, you highlighted one aspect that I think is very relevant, which is at the end of the day, is about creating the enabling conditions through infrastructure, through rules, through processes for the private sector to be able to come in, invest, thrive, and create employment, which is what we want at the end of the day for our people. So with that, Frannie, thank you very much. I think that we have had a great discussion today around one very important topic, which is that integration doesn't happen automatically. You said it very clearly. It needs intent. Intent in working in all of these different areas, infrastructure, rules, processes, to enable economic activity to flow more easily. That is the challenge that countries in Latin America and Caribbean confront today, but it's also a great opportunity that lies ahead. Thank you very much for joining us at this Espresso Chat of the IDB.